This is the last thing you want to see on a drone before it disappears forever. Quite a few years ago, I was flying my first DJI Phantom 4. It was a perfect, calm, sunny day, and I was testing out my then new drone. The conditions couldn't have been better. The sun was shining, the wind was hardly even blowing. It was perfect, or so I thought. And because of that, I'm going to walk you through the huge, critical mistake that I made that caused me to lose my drone. And later, I'll give you a couple of solutions, so hopefully you don't have to learn this lesson the hard way, like I did. G'day friends, you know those days that just screams, go fly a drone? Well, this was one of those days. Bright blue skies, barely a cloud, and down here on the ground, the air was completely still, or very, very small amount of wind. I was out at one of my favourite spots, which was a gorgeous stretch of coastline with these dramatic sand dunes and huge sweeping views of the ocean. And the plan was pretty simple: pop up the drone up to about 400 feet, grab a beautiful panorama of the whole area as the sun started to set, and be home for dinner. And I ran through my usual pre-flight checklist. Compass was calibrated, GPS had a lock on plenty of satellites, and the battery was at 100%. And I even set the return to home altitude way above any obstacles just in case. I took a second to just feel the air. There was nothing, barely a breeze. It felt totally safe. It felt perfect. And honestly, my confidence was my first mistake. I was so focused on how great the conditions were on the ground that I completely forgot one of the most basic rules of flying, that the world where you're standing is not the world at 400 feet. Now, before we get further into the story, if you're new to drone flying, don't forget you can get my free drone starter kit, which is an ebook that gives you heaps of information for a drone beginner, what settings to use and heaps of tips and stuff like that. Link is in the description as always. Alright, so I launched the drone and it was flawless. For the first 100 feet, the drone was perfectly stable, the controls were sharp, and the video feed was crystal clear. It just climbed and climbed, and I watched the world get smaller below me. Everything was going exactly to my plan. But then, as it pushed past 300 feet, I noticed something off. The drone, which had been rock solid a second ago, started to move around a fair bit. The video on my screen got a little bit twitchy, and I, in my inexperience, brushed it off as a bit of turbulence and kept climbing. At 400 feet, I started my slow, smooth pan for the shot, and that's when things went from a little bit weird to a little bit terrifying. The drone just started drifting. It started to just blow away. Now I tried to correct, obviously, pushing the stick to bring it back towards me, but it wasn't even moving. Then a warning flashed on my screen, strong wind warning. And I thought, where the hell did this come from? I was just confused by the whole thing. Strong wind, it was dead calm where I was standing. But a second later, my battery level, which should have been in the high 90s, started to take a massive nosedive. The motors were burning all their power on the drone just to hold the position. So I knew right then, obviously, it's too windy up there for some reason. I need to get this down as quick as possible. So I cancelled the shot and pulled the sticks to descend and fly it back. But it was already too late because it was blowing away from me at an alarming rate. And the drone was losing the battle, drifting backwards over the water and picking up speed. And that beautiful coastline on my screen was getting smaller and smaller. And I felt that horrible pit in my stomach, that totally helpless feeling every drone pilot dreads. My commands on the sticks were doing absolutely nothing. I tried to lower the drone so I could fly back low over the water, which in hindsight was the right move. But in my panic as a beginner, I decided to hit return to home instead. So what do you think happened here? Of course, the drone climbed to its set height and drifted off towards the horizon away from me. And before I could even cancel the return to home and start getting control of the sticks again, connection was just lost, which was pretty common for a Phantom 4 back then. You didn't have to go far to lose connection. They used to talk about 5-kilometre ranges on a Phantom 4, but I used to get like 1.5 kilometres away, maybe 2 kilometres at the most, and I would lose connection all the time. They do not have the connection abilities that drones have now. I stood there for a good 10 minutes just staring at the dead controller going, no, 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 no! I was hoping that screen would just pop back on and I'd get connection again, or that the return to home would bring it back home and it would magically pop up over the horizon. But it never did. It was just gone. Now, the battery life of a Phantom 4 is around 24 minutes, so after another 15 minutes I knew it was gone. I didn't realise at the time, but the reason for this huge wind difference was from behind me a storm was gathering and it was moving in, and what came in first up top was the wind before it hit me on the ground, and I was sheltered by sand dunes and so on. So when you have 5-mile-per-hour winds on the ground, you can easily have 30 miles per hour winds at 400 feet. And my rather bulky Phantom 4 never stood a chance. It was basically a wind pocket. And here's a pic of my first Phantom 4's replacement that I used until 2021. And then it was replaced by the Mavic 2 Pro in this picture. Now, the problem I have is I didn't have DJI Care Refresh on that first Phantom 4, as I've been flying around the Phantom 3 before that, and was probably overconfident. So that was a $2,000 mistake. I didn't think about how much wind speed can change with altitude. Down here in what they call the boundary layer, stuff like trees, hills, sand dunes, buildings slows the wind down. But when you get up high, where there's nothing to stop it, that wind can be a completely different animal. That little whisper of a breeze I felt on the ground turned out to be a monster 400 feet in the air. Now I went back the next day and I walked the coastline hoping that it had made it back, but I never found a trace of that drone ever again. And I've got to admit, that feeling of loss is just gut-wrenching, because I know that drone is in the water somewhere out in the ocean. So let me know, have you ever had a close call like this, or even lost a drone to something you didn't see coming? Drop your story in the comments. Losing my drone was an expensive, painful way to learn a lesson, but it's one I will never ever forget. My mistake wasn't a technical problem or a faulty drone, it was just bad judgment and inexperience. So here's my advice or solution to this. Before you even think about taking off, don't just look at the trees next to you. Use an app like UAV Forecast or Windy, which I love, and check the wind speeds at the altitude you're planning to fly. Also, know your drone's limits, and a good rule of thumb is to not even fly if the wind is more than 2/3 of its max wind resistance. And if possible, always fly out against the wind, so when you turn around to come back, you have a tailwind helping you, saving that precious battery if winds pick up. That perfect day taught me that sometimes the biggest dangers are the ones you can't see, so please learn from my boneheaded mistake. Check the winds above, fly safe, and hopefully you'll never have to experience that horrible feeling of watching your drone just disappear. And now that you're flying safe and your environment is perfect, you might want to look at getting some cinematic moves out of your drone, and this video here will help you with that perfectly. I've got a whole bunch of suggestions and cool ways you can make your videos look amazing. Thanks for watching.